is James here with the Oracle Outlook for the week starting March the 2nd, 2020. Thanks so much for tuning in and joining me for this week's video reading. I am so happy to have you here. If this is your first time here, I'd like to say welcome, and if you're returning, I'd like to say welcome back. This week, I wanted to work with tarot, and I wanted to work with tarot for two reasons. First is that I'm honoring the request of one of my viewers who, over the course of the week, asked me if I would be willing to work with tarot just a little bit more in this space than what I currently do. And that same viewer offered the suggestion for a project involving tarot, and if I take it on, it's going to be one of my most exhaustive video series to date. So I'm still in the process of mulling that over. But when I make the decision to go forward, I will fill you all in on the details then. The second reason is that I realized today, I'm shooting this video on February the 29th, 2020, which is Leap Day, that a significant anniversary in my life was just about to quietly go by without any recognition from me. I almost let it go by. And that is, in February of 1999, I got my very first tarot deck. So February is tarot anniversary month for me. And so this month I'm celebrating my 21st anniversary being a tarot card reader. And I'm just so excited. I'm glad I caught it, but I'm so excited. With that in mind, I'm working with a deck system that is significant in my tarot experience and journey, and that is one of the Rider-Waite Smith decks, one of the variants, and that is specifically I'm working with the Smith-Waite Tarot. And the reason why is, like I said, it's a very significant deck system in my tarot journey. When I first started, I worked with the Crowley-Toth deck system, and I did that for about 2 years, and then at that point I decided I wanted to get a second deck, and so I got a Rider-Waite Smith deck, and it totally changed how I was reading my cards at the time. So that is one of the reasons it holds a very significant place and space in my journey, but also in my heart. And then the second reason is right after that deck purchase, the universe decided it was time for me to go pro. So that's when I became a professional reader. So those two reasons, that the Rider-Waite Smith system holds a significant place in my tarot journey. And so specifically, again, like I said, I'm working with the Smith-Waite Tarot deck, the Centennial Edition, and that is published by US Game Systems Incorporated. So now that I've set things up, let's get to the table and take a closer look at what the Smith-Waite Tarot deck wants to share with us about the week ahead. And here we are with the cards on the table, and I'm going to take a few moments to shuffle the deck. And as I shuffle the cards, I'm focusing on my usual intention for these weekly general readings. And that is for the information, for the insight, for the guidance and advice that is going to be most helpful and beneficial to come through the cards for the upcoming week. Now see that? One card fell out, so I'm going to put that, oh, two cards fell out, so I'm going to put those aside. This is going to be card 1 and card 2 when we get to that place. Those are jumper cards, so now it'll be interesting to see that. So now, since that happened, I'm going to go ahead and stop shuffling, and we'll go ahead and cut the deck. And fan the cards out. And I wanted to work with 5 cards this week, so since 2 jumped out, I'm going to go ahead and just pull 3 from the fan that are getting my attention. I'm looking for the final card. All right. So now I'm going to take the remainder of the deck up, and we'll move that to one side. And so these are the 3 cards. I'm just going to do it this way because I want to put them in a line. And these were the 2 cards. I've already put them in the order that they jumped out. And so I had another agenda, but since we had 2 jumpers this week, I'm going to go with the jumpers first because they are demanding to be seen. They are needing some attention. They want to really make their point known or share whatever their message is. So let's take a look at them, starting with the card on the far left. The first jumper, we have the Fool. Okay. So when the Fool card turns up for me, it usually represents being at a beginning stage or a new phase or a new chapter in life, right? And what I love about it is that the Fool is walking away, literally walking away from the other cards, right? So for some people, with that visual in mind, it's about putting the past behind you, and it's about, you know, starting fresh or having a clean slate, that kind of thing, right? It could also be a week where we're being asked to have a leap of faith, or take a leap of faith, I should say, right? Because of the imagery where the Fool is about to walk off a cliff. So it's about, you know, operating in faith, you know, so, you know, taking a leap of faith. Now, for some of us, it's about, if we're moving into a new stage or a new phase or new chapter in our life, it's about taking that first step. And that's the most important step to take, is that first step. And so for some of us, that could be quite a doozy, right? Especially if maybe we've had a past or a history where, you know, we've wanted to play it safe, we wanted to be cautious. It's reminding me of the Fool that was in the reading that I did for the week of Valentine's Day. And so it was in the same position for a row of cards. It was the first card. So I'm just repeating some of those things because it's coming back to me. So for some of us, it's about, you know, taking a chance, taking a leap of faith, you know, just jumping in. And then for some of us, it may be a matter of playing it safe, you know, not wanting to take any kind of unnecessary risks, right? It could be, and if that's the case, then their underlying thing with that could be, you know, maybe having an experience where, you know, we didn't operate with the best judgment, right? Because sometimes the Fool card can represent unwise decisions or unwise decision making, you know, and being played for a fool, that kind of thing, right? So there is that. And so how can you work through that as you move on to the next phase, chapter, or new experience, right? So on some level, you'd have to be willing to put that in the past or put that behind you, right? That whole experience where maybe the situation didn't work out in your best interest, in your best and highest good, didn't work out in your favor. And it's about how can you finally put that and leave that in the past, right? So there is that. Now, the one other thing I will say about the Fool card, and especially if we're starting on a new phase or embarking on a new chapter in our lives, whether it's literal, like we're literally stepping out because this card is about travel, so maybe moving on literally, or I see this more as metaphorically, right? So in the metaphorical sense, then this card is about coming up to a place in our lives where we are no longer concerned about conforming or fitting in. Because the message with the Fool card is about not trying to fit in. It's about you being you, you doing you, that kind of thing. So I'm seeing that. Now I'm looking at the 0 at the top of the card. So this card is numbered 0. So I'm looking at that as coming into a place of wholeness, right? And I'm looking, and the Fool is actually looking up at the number 0. So this could be taking that all-important step into that new phase, new chapter, maybe feeling like it's all or nothing kind of thing, right? Or that we are moving into a space in our lives where we are feeling whole and we are feeling complete, that kind of thing. And I'm going to go maybe with the spiritual context. If you are embarking on a new spiritual path, which the Fool can also represent, then this could just be trusting in Source, trusting in the all, right? Source energy, right? That would be the 0 and the sun as 2 symbols that represent source energy, right? In the all. Right, so that's what I'm seeing with the Fool. Again, this could be about embarking on a new phase, new chapter, you know, a fresh start, a clean slate. Oh, this is what's coming to me in the moment too, as I was repeating some of the other things, is that sometimes the Fool card can come up when we're moving into that new phase, new chapter, and we may not have a whole lot of experience with whatever it is that we're moving towards. And this card would say, that's okay. You know, this may be about learning as you go. Right? There's always going to be some phase in life where you're the beginner, you're the novice, you're just starting out, you may feel a little green, right? And that's not green around the gills, it's green as like, you know, just starting out, right? And that's a pun for all the green that the Fool is actually wearing, right? So there is that to consider. So it could just be moving into a space where you don't have a whole lot of experience, but that's okay. Right, so again, new phase, beginning, fresh start, clean slate, you know, taking a leap of faith, trusting in source energy, all those kinds of things. Okay, so now let's see what the Fool is walking away from with the card, the second jumper card, right? Oh, and I just realized, what a funny pun, right? The Fool's about to walk off a cliff, right? And we're talking about jumper cards. Okay, so now let's take a look at the second one. Oh, okay. Now, the first thing I will say, because I didn't mention this with the Fool, is that we have two cards from the major arcana. And if you're not familiar with the arcana in tarot, we have two arcana. We have the majors, which these two are, and the majors talk about important issues or events, important lessons that we're learning through those events, right? And those lessons or those events are designed for our personal growth and development or our spiritual growth and development. So we have two cards from the major arcana, so this is significant, and I love the fact that they were both jumper cards, right? So they each had something significant to say. All right, so now the second card is the High Priestess, because I have not named the card yet. So the first thing that I want to say in terms of lessons, this card carries with it the lesson of independence, right? So if we're moving into a new phase or we're embarking on a new chapter, there may be some quality of independence with that. It reminds me of something that I said with last week's reading. I used the Gypsy Witch cards, and there was a kind of a similar theme with independence, right? I talked about that with the cat card. It's all coming back to me now, right? So we had the cat card as the first card in that reading, and for me, cats symbolize independence. So we're getting it again with the High Priestess, right? And so with that, we have to kind of balance. She's in between two pillars, and so that's all about balance, being in between things or in the middle of something, right? So here we have two extremes. We have a black pillar and we have a white pillar, right? So this is about the balance between independence and dependency, right? And so for some people, what's coming to me in my mind is that maybe somebody is walking away from a codependent relationship, because the High Priestess in that regard would represent disappointment in love. Now remember, the Fool is walking away from the High Priestess, right? So if we go with the idea that somebody's putting this in the past, in the rearview mirror, so to speak, then this is about possibly being in a codependent relationship and being disappointed with that. Now it could also be somebody is moving on and they're doing with a sense of independence, right? So there is that. Now the High Priestess can also be, if we're embarking on a new phase or new stage or new chapter in our lives, when she comes up, she represents needing to wait for further information. I usually look at her as there may be a decision that needs to be made, and if that's the case, then there's a need to wait for further information. So that may be what I was seeing with the Fool card regarding for those of us who may be more risk averse, or needing to play it safe, or needing to be cautious, or before I take that first step, I want to make sure that I'm as informed as I possibly can be, right? To minimize the risk, right? So I'm seeing that with the High Priestess and the Fool. Now, just turning our attention to the High Priestess. Whenever she comes up, she can also represent our intuition and working with that, right? So there may be between the two cards, something about working on your intuitive development, right? She can represent literally studying because she's holding a scroll. She's actually holding the Torah, which is the Jewish book of law, right? So there may be somebody who's studying religion or studying metaphysics, something of that nature, right? But if not, then this could just be a learning opportunity regarding one's intuitive development, right? And if that's the case, then when I get the Fool card, this represents paying attention to what goes on with your intuition this week, because this represents being at a peak, right? He's on a cliff, right? So this is about your intuition being at its peak this week, right? So it's very important to pay attention to your intuition. You may want to actually take the action step to either meditate on things this week and seeing what comes up in your meditations, or actually documenting some messages, maybe some dreams, maybe some symbolism that keeps coming up for you again and again, those kinds of things. Now this is interesting. I usually don't get this kind of thing, but I'm just going to share it since it's coming to me. The High Priestess is sitting in front of a veil, and this usually is a nod to the veil. There's a veil to the other side, right? So she can be, for some people, suggesting mediumship. But what was coming to me is that behind the veil, or anything behind her, is the past, symbolically, right? So there may be something about the past that may be revealed that maybe you weren't aware of. That's one possibility, and my head is tingling as I'm saying that. So for some people, it may be uncovering or some sort of revelation about the past, something that you were not aware of until the moment you get that information, right? Another thing that was coming to me, this was actually what was coming to me before that other thought jumped in, is that the High Priestess can represent, going with the idea of mediumship and the other side, I was seeing something having to do with someone's past life or past life material. I normally am not a past life person, but that's what's coming to me in the moment. So there may be something about a past life information or past life knowledge or awareness around that, and how it affects this life, because in that regard, the Fool card can represent the soul incarnating into this life, right? So it's making me feel like there's something for someone about resolving something that they see as a past life influence. Okay, like I said, I don't normally talk like that. I don't normally see that kind of thing, but there you go, right? So another thing that the High Priestess would represent, and this is more in my wheelhouse, is that she can represent the intuitive arts. So I'm working with tarot this week. That's an intuitive art. So if you are into tarot, if you're into astrology, numerology, runes, any kind of intuitive or divinatory art, this card is suggesting how can you move from maybe being a beginner to maybe becoming more of an adept or more in depth with your study or your practice, right? Because the Fool card could represent being a beginner in that, right? So it's about taking your practice to the next stage or level, right? And then the only other thing I would say with the High Priestess, and again, I'm looking at the fact that she's in between two pillars, as advice, she may be offering to us about being mindful about not getting in the middle of situations maybe that don't entirely involve us or that are none of our business. Right? So there's that. Okay, so that's the Fool and the High Priestess. So now let's take a look at the cards that I picked for this week's reading, starting with the first card here in the middle. And here we have the Temperance card. So here we have another major arcana card. So the first thing that I'm going to say is that this could be a week where we have some significant events taking place. And if that's the case, if that resonates with you as you are moving through the week, keep this question in mind. What are these experiences teaching me that I wouldn't get to learn any other way? Remember, she's all about learning, knowledge being gained, right? Now, the other thing I want to say with Temperance, and it's coming right on the heels of what I last said about the High Priestess and about getting in the middle of a situation, right? Between two things. So here we have two messages about not going to extremes. We had it with the High Priestess with the two poles, right? The black and the white, that seeing things in black and white are going to extremes. We have it with the Temperance card with the 2 cups, right? This card is all about patience. But what was coming to me in the moment is like, if you're going to choose to get in the middle of something that isn't entirely your business, then it's about helping maybe mediate that. But the biggest thing that's going to help is about people who need to achieve or reach some type of compromise. So that's the first thing, right? So it could just be a matter of what do we need to do to achieve either balance, or if we're having something with another person, how can we work on reaching some state of compromise? And compromise means this. Compromise means we come up with a creative solution, because that's the Temperance card for me, creative solutions where it works in the best interest of both parties. So it's not a win-lose for either side, it's a win-win, right? So how can each side come to a state of compromise and feel like they're coming out of the situation a winner, right? So there's that. Now, I'm going with the obvious. Here we have an image of an angel. So for some of us, I talked about intuitive arts and I talked about past life stuff. So now let's just throw angels into the mix. So for some of us, there may be doing some angel work. And so I will say that resonates with me because I have been behind the scenes since Valentine's Day, where I worked with an angel card deck on camera. I have steadily been working with my angel cards ever since. So since I talked about reading cards with the High Priestess, even though I mentioned tarot, this would still be about divination or reading cards, then this may be a nod for some people to maybe become more adept. Temperance is all about being a spiritual adept, becoming more adept in your esoteric or metaphysical study or practice, or your intuitive art or study, and there's something about moving from being a beginner or a novice to becoming more adept. So there is that to consider. So how can you deepen your study, your practice, right? Now, if we go with the idea that the Fool was talking about something new and the beginning stage of something, then the Temperance card here talks about getting your feet wet. The angel has 1 foot on land and 1 foot in water. So again, we have that idea about balance, right? But here, it's about like dipping your toes in the water, getting your feet wet. You know, you're doing that to test the waters, right? So it's about maybe incorporating something new into your life or working with something new in your life, and you want to get a feel for it. The best way you can do that is to experiment. This card is about experimentation. So what would you be willing to experiment with? Now, if you're wanting to make some changes in your life, this would be the same thing. What would be the one small thing you could do to get that process going, to get that process started, right? What small way can you dip your toes into the metaphorical waters? So there is that. Now, another thing here, I'm seeing, if we go with the idea that we're talking about maybe somebody's spiritual practice, then Temperance card can be talking about combining things because of the 2 cups, right? So this could be experimentation, combining things, blending things, those kinds of things, right? It's about taking 2 different elements or ingredients and putting them together to come up with something totally new or totally different, right? And that would come back to the Fool about being different, right? So there is that. I'm taking a look to see what else do I want to say about this. Yeah. Okay. So if we're talking about one spiritual path, because I'm looking at the imagery here on the side, this is a path, and here we have a crown, right? So for me, that's a pun for either a crowning achievement, which would imply some kind of success. So this would be being on the path to a crowning achievement or some kind of success, or that we're on a spiritual path, and it's a path that's leading to some kind of enlightenment, and this would be a pun for the crown chakra. And that would make sense because the angel has a radius or a halo around its head. So that would represent some form of enlightenment. It's making me feel, the phrase that I want to use is about the renewing of one's mind, right? It's about changing the way you think, or having an aha, having an epiphany, having some kind of revelation, right? But I think it's tied to one's path, right? Now, another thing with this card is that it's known as a healing card. I tend to look at this as the spiritual healer card. So somebody may actually even be doing some spiritual healing work or being called to that. You know, there are all forms of different spiritual healing modalities and techniques out there. I'm a Reiki practitioner myself, so I tend to think of Reiki first and foremost, but that's just because of my background. But there are other, like I said, healing modalities. So somebody could be wanting to become more adept with their healing practice or their healing work, right? So for instance, like I talked about being a Reiki practitioner. So if Reiki is your thing, then this card could suggest maybe moving from one level to the next, right? Becoming more adept, right? So there is that. So again, temperance is about compromise. You know, what are we willing to do creatively to come up with a solution, to reach a compromise with another person, right? So there's that. If you're doing angel work, this is a nod to continue with that. And it could be working with more than one angel, right? You may have, sometimes I see different angels with this. So in one respect, this could represent your guardian angel, because your guardian angel is the angel that is closest to you. I refer to guardian angels as the ones who have been willing to take on the assignment of you, right? And this would make sense with the Fool card, because the Fool card can represent birth and children in their formative years, right? So here we have that. So this could be like working on developing a closer bond or connection, High Priestess, right, between you and your guardian angel. That would be the first angel. Then I see Archangel Michael with this. So some people may feel inclined to work more closely with Archangel Michael in particular, right? And that may be in part because you want to know more about your path, because Archangel Michael is the angel that I know of that works with us regarding our divine life purpose. And also, too, coming back to the Fool, Archangel Michael is good to assist us in becoming clear on what our next immediate action step is. When I do angel work, the angels are all about being in the moment, in the present moment, in the now moment, right? And so what they do is they give us a step that we can take in this moment. And then once we take that step, then the next step is revealed, and so on and so on and so on, right? So if you are maybe questioning your path, or maybe feeling like you haven't been making any kind of movement and wanting to know what's going on with that, stop and ask if you've been taking any action on the step that maybe you were given either by spirit or by the angels or by your guides. The High Priestess can also represent a spirit guide. You know, if you have not taken that step, these cards are encouraging you to be willing to take that step so that the next step can present itself, right? And that would be a reference to the veil, right? Behind the High Priestess, right? So that's Archangel Michael. And then another archangel is Archangel Cassio. And so Archangel Cassio is actually known as the angel of temperance, right? But it's also known as the angel that helps us move through sorrow or sadness, right? Because I equate Cassio with tears. So now this would come back to one of the things I said early on about maybe a person who's moving away from maybe a relationship that was imbalanced in terms of maybe codependent, right? And so, of course, anytime, even if we're in the right, and even if we know it's the right thing to do, then this card is suggesting on some level there's still going to be some sadness, right? There still may be tears with that. And so if you work with angels, you can call upon Archangel Cassio, and I will spell it. It's C-A-S-S-I-E-L, Cassio. And again, Cassio is the angel of temperance, but it can also help us move through difficult emotional situations, and that would be a pun for all the water, right? But there is something about taking that first step. We have the Fool about to walk off the cliff, and we have the angel dipping his toes in the water. So there's something about taking that first step and being willing to take the first step, right? And then temperance, again, is all about, you know, being patient, going with the flow, being adaptable, you know, maybe wanting to try something around some sort of alternative science, right? I talked about her representing law, right, with the book of Jewish law. This card is known, if you're a student,
then this card is all about the arts and sciences, right? So it could be, somebody who's doing something with that in mind, right? And maybe needing to blend two different types of studies is what I'm seeing in the moment here. Okay, but that is temperance. Temperance is asking us to focus on, as the middle card, focus on being patient. So there may be something about the art of being patient this week. And I will share this as a brief story because I was feeling inclined I was going to share this at some point. So this is a good time to share this. So be mindful of the intentions that you set regarding patience. I learned this through this experience. So one day, James Mitchell, meaning me, woke up and he's made a declaration that he wanted to start being more patient, right? So I set the intention to do something new, something different, right? So what happened was the world around me did not get the memo. So if you are a person who's wanting to work on being patient and you're making that your declaration, this is what actually happens. All the same situations that would make you normally react in impatience are still going to present themselves. All the people that you get impatient with, all the situations that you get impatient with will still be there, and they will still show up in your field. And I talk about your energetic field or right in your face, right? They will still show up. What has to happen is that you have to be willing to choose to react and respond differently, because the world's not going to get your memo. They're not going to get your declaration, right? They're not going to be on board. It's about you showing up differently, coming back to the Fool. You have to be willing to take the step to do something differently, right, in order to produce a different result. So that is actually how I learned. So when people tell me these days how they are impressed with my patience, I always remember that as an experience. Like I had to develop that, right? It was a spiritual muscle that I had to flex. And the only way I got to flex it would be having all the things that would normally make me impatient continue to show up until I decided the way I've been reacting and responding isn't working for me anymore, and I'm going to do it differently. Okay? So there's another aspect of temperance that could come into play this week. Is the art of learning to be patient, going with the flow, being flexible, and being adaptable. Okay, so now let's move on to the next card. Okay, and here we have the Six of Wands. I love this. Coming on the heels of what I just said, this card is all about a triumph, a victory, a success. And that plays on the laurel wreath at the top of the wand that the writer is holding, right? So this is about a triumph, victory, success. Now, it would be a triumph, a victory, a success, or some kind of breakthrough, but there's going to be work or effort attached to that endeavor, right? Something that we have to work at, because wands for me can represent work or business, right? So if it's not work and business in the literal sense, meaning one's job, and I'll come back to that idea in a moment, then it usually represents something that we have to put some work and effort into. Now, coming back to the job situation, right? This card would suggest somebody wanting to do something with their work that is more meaningful, because this card could represent doing work that's rewarding, or that there's an underlying need for some kind of recognition with the work that you're doing. So if you are the metaphysical person, let's just say with these three cards, if you're the metaphysical person who's working on your spiritual practice, maybe either intuitive work or energy healing work, right? Something of alternative spiritual nature, then this card is asking you to consider what would you need to do to gain more recognition for that work. It may be a matter of just sharing with more people, because I'm looking that there are people on the ground behind the man riding on the horse, right? So it could just be a matter of like, could you get the word out to more people, or how can more people recognize what it is that you do? And that would be especially if you are a local-based business, because I'm going back to the idea that he's on a horse, right? It could also be like if you are moving into spiritually based work, then this is about gaining support for that work, right? And so you have to be mindful who you share that work with. It would be better to have a more supportive audience or a supportive base or supportive system around you than people who may not share a certain kind of belief around the work, depending on what the subject matter is about it, like people who just don't get it, that kind of thing. Now, I read with direction in mind, and I noticed that we had the Fool who's walking away from the line. Now we have movement, that's the horse, from Temperance to whatever this card is, right? But coming back to this card, which is the only minor arcana card on the table this week so far, is that taking the steps, the action steps to achieve some kind of success, some kind of triumph, some kind of victory. But it may take some work or effort. Right? Now, if we're talking about a relationship issue, I was about to move on, but if we're talking about a relationship issue, there may be a need for some kind of recognition that one party is not getting. Right? Remember that this was the compromise card, right? So it could be like somebody is asking for some kind of recognition, and then the other party would have to consider whether or not they want to work in honoring that. So that's what I'm seeing with the Six of Wands. So now let's take a look at the last card, rounding the line out. And here we have the Four of Pentacles. So this is our second minor arcana card. So now the Four of Pentacles can represent retention. For me, it's about holding on to something, right? And so I'm going to go somewhere here with this. So sometimes this can be about holding on to money, because Pentacles is the suit of money. So for some people, it may be a matter of what do we need to do in terms of work and effort this week to achieve some kind of financial stability or financial security, because it's making me feel like one thing that somebody could be doing is saving money, right? So this is about holding on to your money, right? Not let it flow out of your hands. As soon as it comes in, it flows out, right? So somebody may be taking a look at that, about their cash flow, their money flow, right? And two cards about achieving balance. Here, I'm coming back here. If this is about money and retaining money, if we're moving this way, then this card is about like, what do we need to do to balance the books, right? She's holding the scroll. So that's like documentation, that's information, right? It's about gaining knowledge. Once you're aware, once you have the knowledge, and you can do something about it. It's about gaining the knowledge first, right? And then there may be something having to do with one's financial plan. I'm using the High Priestess and the Four of Pentacles, financial plan, financial advice, those kinds of things, right? So in a literal sense, somebody may need to be doing something about holding on to their money, saving money, or if they're wanting to do more rewarding work or more meaningful work, or wanting to feel a greater sense of triumph, victory, or success with work, it may be a matter of acquiring more money, right? So somebody may be thinking about, a raise or ways that they can achieve more money. Now, if a person is about getting the message out with their spiritually based business, then this is about retention. Or so it could be about how can you retain clients, again, because the energy of this card is about holding on to something, right? Something of value, right? The Pentacles, if it's not about money specifically, is about what do we value, right? So for that person with the spiritually based business, it could be, looking for ways to retain clients. I'm seeing this maybe even having repeat clients, right? If that's the case and if that resonates with you, it's about how you can get them to see what the value is that you offer, right? So think about that. Yes, the spiritually based business, there may be an intangible quality or asset to the work, but what is the concrete, real world value that work brings to you and your clients? If you can communicate that clearly, then you could also be making more money at it. Right, so there's that. Now, I'm going to come back as a way to wrap this up, back to the very first card. Remember, the first thing I said about the Fool card was about direction, right? Walking away from the rest of the line, right? If that's the case, if we mirror the cards, one reason could be is that there may be somebody who's holding on to something in the course of a relationship. Sometimes this could be about maybe a literal material thing, something of value. I usually equate this with the sense of like I'm holding on to a grudge, right? And so then if that's the case, then the Four of Pentacles is asking you, what is the payoff, or what is the reward, or what is the benefit that you get, if it is you, out of holding on to a grudge, right? Or holding on to the past. If we read with direction in mind, this is about a new phase, a new chapter, a new start, and all these cards are the past, then what do you get out of holding on to the past? Maybe the advice with the Four of Pentacles for you, if you understand that, is about, would you be willing to let go of the past once and for all? And not only that, would you be willing to move on from the past, right? But you have to ask yourself the hard question this week, maybe, is what do you get out of holding on to the past? And so on that note, I will go ahead and end this week's Oracle Outlook reading here. I'm James Himm Mitchell, and I'd like to thank you for sharing the space here with me for this week's reading, and I look forward to sharing the same space with you again in our next video reading together. So until then, I'm hoping that you have a wonderful day, and I'm hoping that you have a very tarot-tastic week. Take care.